Even a man who is pure of heart and says his prayers by night may become a wolf when the wolfbane blooms and the autumn moon is bright. Chilling words that describe the hopelessness and fear faced by those with lycanthropy. By day they are normal human beings. They go to work, eat breakfast, and love their families, just as you and I. However, during full moon nights every month, they transform into a terrifying wolf beast, hell-bent on killing to satiate their terrible desire for flesh. Bestowed by deities or evil magicians, the curse of the werewolf is often inflicted on those who have slighted their god or insulted a witch, and is incredibly difficult to remove. Often the only treatment is to lock the poor afflicted soul away until the transformation has run its course, leaving the cursed person to live a normal life until the next full moon, whereupon their captivity will begin again. These extreme steps are necessary due to the incredible strength that the werewolf possesses, and, what's more, is that the transformed is overcome with the bestial rage that lasts the duration of the transformation. Naturally, this threatens all those around the werewolf, loved ones and community members, and even surrounding fauna. None are safe from the violence of this monster. Apart from sorcery or blasphemy, the curse can also be transferred by the bite of another werewolf. Should a victim of a werewolf be fortunate enough to survive an attack, they will soon regret their good luck, as they shall find that they too are afflicted with the curse. Poor fortune and lax piety are not the only means by which one may become a werewolf. Those who carry malice in their hearts or seek power may use relics and rituals with the intent of employing this curse to mask their own evil deeds. A pact with the devil, or magical ointment, and even something as simple as sleeping naked outside during a full moon can cause this curse to manifest. Although the most common method is to use a magical wolf pelt or wolf skin belt, which allows the werewolf to control its transformation to a greater degree. In such latter cases, the wanton transformation provides a convenient excuse for any and all hoping to kill their enemies or carry out concealed crimes. It is clear that often those who wish to possess this curse bear malicious intent. Alas, often the only cure for lycanthropy is death, especially for those who willingly accept it. Few remedies exist, and even then their efficacy is dubious. Nevertheless, surgery, potions, and exorcism are often turned to in hopes of ending it, though usually simple exhaustion is used as a preemptive treatment for the transformation, as those who have been cursed with lycanthropy often report extreme fatigue after their transformation. Thus, excessive manual labor is prescribed in hopes of quelling the beast lurking within them. The werewolf is often hunted as a simple beast by those who can no longer bear the terror and psychological oppression that comes with living in such close proximity to danger. And indeed, the solution is perhaps the most effective, but comes at a great cost to the minds of the hunters, knowing that they must put down a friend, a difficult task indeed. As such, uniquely brave individuals have made a living hunting werewolves. Wielding silver and fire, these brave souls are often charged with duties that sees them being part executioner, part redeemer, for anyone and anywhere burdened with this curse. However, despite the near ceaseless attempts to reduce the werewolf population to zero, and no matter how committed the lycanthropes are to curing themselves, the supernatural origin of this curse will ensure that we can never truly be rid of it, and thus the werewolf is something that will continue to exist so long as human beings do. We can only hope to keep our hearts pure and say our nighttime prayers dutifully in an effort to thwart the eternal encroachment of this nightmare. Like the often associated vampire, the werewolf is a key figure in modern popular culture. Indeed, the popularity of both of these creatures is born from their shared lore and interconnected myths. From the servants of vampires to their eternal enemies, the werewolf has long been at odds with the vampire, even in the most abstracted of modern renditions. As a consequence, it is very common to find both the werewolf and vampire sharing the same media, such as books, films, and games. However, this connection, that seems so essential in modern times, wasn't always the case. This connection can be traced back to Bram Stoker's seminal vampire book, Dracula. In this novel, it is suggested that werewolves are a part of one of Dracula's bloodlines, the Skeksis. In fact, Dracula himself is shown as being able to transform into a wolf during the course of this novel. After the subtle yet seemingly logical connection was drawn, people ran with it, and eventually this grew into the lore we see today. This small reference in the Dracula novel is taken to the most logical extreme in the Underworld series of films, where vampires and werewolves are depicted as being separate descendants of the Corvinus clan, and this is further expanded upon in the associated docudrama entitled Fang vs. Fiction. However, prior to this connection, the werewolf was a singular creature that occurred predominantly in Europe and her colonies. The werewolf could originally be found as a kind of witch or warlock employing the pelt of some creature in order to take on that creature's form when conducting nefarious deeds. However, these depictions of the werewolf are very much unlike what we would consider to be a werewolf in modern times, for the creature that the person transformed into was entirely at the whim of the magician and was entirely dependent on the skin to which they had access to. As such, the werewolf form was merely one of many therianthropes that existed. It is interesting to see that this myth of donning the skin of an animal, which would then transform one into that creature, is so widespread. Indeed, we could consider that this myth is perhaps as old as humanity itself. Going to America, legends of werewolves are very common in the southeastern parts of that country, as well as the Caribbean. In fact, the mystical culture in that area has seen many modern legends born from that culture. With various names such as Lucaru, Geru, and Skinwalker, the werewolf is a particularly prominent creature within the southern USA culture. What's most interesting is that this version of the werewolf actively seeks to spread its affliction, much in contrast with the more common and incidental occurrence of a survived werewolf attack, making the American werewolf unique in this respect. In Eastern Europe, the curse was usually contracted at a young age and only manifested as an adult. A common superstition in the north was that a child born with hair would later become a werewolf, while in Hungary, children who were subject to abuse held the potential of transforming into the savage beast. This latter example is probably an early identification of the violent consequences of post-traumatic stress disorder. Much like the eastern side of Europe, we see a myriad of variations of the werewolf curse that flare up through the centuries, from instances of madness in 16th century France to the 17th century witch hunts, and even long before with the Danish bestial berserker warriors. We found the werewolf to be a common creature within European culture. The myth within Europe even extends all the way back to ancient Greece, where King Lycon was cursed by Zeus to adopt the features and countenance of a wolf. This was in response to an insult Lycon accidentally offered to Zeus by way of trying to feed the god human flesh. It is quite easy to see how ancient the werewolf myth is in European culture. This latter example finds its way into the modern medical lexicon with a medical condition known as clinical lycanthropy, a form of psychosis where one believes they have transformed, or can transform, into an animal of some sort. This also extends to the term lunacy, moon madness, a term coined to describe the maddening effects a full moon appears to have on people, particularly those who are clinically insane. Much like the vampire, the werewolf is an important cultural touchstone in the modern world, and from these myriad cultures we have distilled a unique, terrifying, and enigmatic beast that, if history is any witness, will be with us for a long time to come. The origin of the werewolf myth is indeed difficult to trace. Despite the fact that this creature is as popular as it is today, we are confronted by the fact that this beast has so many influences upon which it draws. As we have seen, the primary inspiration of the modern werewolf comes to us from late Middle Ages and Renaissance Europe, particularly from the Christian culture, though beyond these Christian examples we find the creature's history fading into the mists of time. Indeed, it appears the myth of the werewolf has been a part of European culture since time immemorial. As mentioned, we see old accounts from Greek legends that describe their werewolf. However, if we look further north to ancient Germanic cultures, we find the werewolf is far more common. In these northern cultures, the werewolf transformation is primarily reliant upon the donning of the pelt of an animal to take on its form, which leaves us with the question as to where this tradition may come from. Like in most cultures, various leathers were used in clothing manufacturing and the like. So what set the daily use leathers apart from those that would create werewolves? To answer these questions, we look to the aforementioned berserkers and the tradition of wolf hunting in Europe. Wolf hunting was a common practice in ancient Europe, as the wolves inhabiting the French and German areas of that continent presented a great threat to the lives of those inhabiting those same areas. As a consequence, people would hunt the wolves with great frequency. This, in turn, would see wolf skins entering common trade, and, due to the lethality of this creature, it would certainly be highly prized. This value, combined with the frequent minor conflicts that occurred in Europe during these ages, would see the rise of the berserker. The Berserker was ostensibly an individual who fought with animal madness and strength, although some understandings of the Berserker sees the individual fighting almost entirely naked. Nevertheless, the Berserkers are often depicted wearing the skins of various animals, such as wolves and bears. What's more is that it's probably quite certain that someone wearing the skin of a creature, such as a wolf, would be emboldened and thus fight harder, allowing for a more psychological rather than physiological advantage. Despite being entirely speculative, it is then not hard to imagine that this tradition of wearing animal skins would slowly mutate over time into something more supernatural, where the wearing of animal skin was no longer a symbol of the warrior's prowess, but rather granted them superhuman strength, inverting the causal relationship between the fighter and his pelt, from indicating power to granting it. Indeed, we find that even in ancient Rome there was a tradition of captains and other high-ranking officers to wear wolfskins into battle, despite the fact that Roman culture held the wolf sacred. This goes to show how widespread the tradition was throughout Europe. However, after the spread of Christianity through the Roman Empire, we find that old pagan traditions become alternatively vilified or appropriated, where the ultra-charitable culture espoused by Christianity would naturally be antagonistic to any pagan beliefs that would enhance one's capacity for violence, and, as a direct result, we would see the werewolf transform from a symbol of power into a feared and hated monster. Although obscure and speculative, we can perhaps see from the short exploration how the werewolf legend of yore became the curse we know today. The werewolf as we know it today is rather difficult to reify. Most modern fantasy portrays the victim of the curse being able to transform almost entirely into a wolf-like creature within the space of a few moments. Indeed, these transformations are quite drastic, where the person changes size and species in a very short space of time. Simply put, transformations in this modern sense are impossible. The amount of energy and mass required to complete this transformation is well beyond what the laws of thermodynamics would allow the human body to achieve, let alone endure. So we must modify our legend somewhat to match what is possible. Our first option is to lengthen the time in which the werewolf transforms. This would take months, perhaps even years, depending on the extent of the transformation, as well as the final size of the creature. As a consequence, we cannot expect a dramatic transformation the likes of which is portrayed in films. Indeed, this would probably see the werewolf unable to transform back into its human form, and even then, it's doubtful the werewolf would survive the transformation, as such a drastic transformation to one's physiology can be quite lethal. However, this would see the myth remain more or less intact. Our second option for the werewolf transformation is more focused on the psychology of the person, much more in line with what we would see in the pelt-wearing warriors of yore. The practical upshot of this form of transformation is that it would allow for sudden and dramatic changes without violating the laws of nature, and would maintain the primary characteristic of the werewolf, its aggression. The lunar effect is a phenomenon where the behavior of human beings and other animals seems to alter with the cycles of the moon. People appear to become irrational and violent during full moons and subdued during new moon. This behavior, though only tentatively confirmed, matches well with the werewolf's full moon cycle, as well as the second manner in which the werewolf may exist. As such, this transformation meets many of the conditions required to reify the werewolf legend. However, this simple alteration is unsatisfying, and we ought to examine the morphological changes experienced by the werewolf. Initially, let us consider the transmission medium to explain the curse's communicability. As with the vampire and zombie, we would do well to choose a virus to be the agent whereby the wolf is created. This medium gives us many options for explaining the transformation, such as altering the genetic information of the host, as in most retroviri, and even altering the psychology of the afflicted individual, as such is found in the hydrophobia-inducing rabies, explaining how lunacy may be acquired from infection. The virus allows us to explain how a bite or scratch might transfer the disease, which is very similar to what we see in modern myths. Not only this, but we find some more hardy viri, such as Ebola, can spread through contact with infected sweat, perhaps explaining how improperly treated animal fur can, if worn by a human being, ultimately transfer the disease. Altering the genetic makeup of the infected person also allows us to alter the physical appearance of the infected individual. As a side effect of the virus's alteration, we could perhaps justify the natural synthesis of minoxidil within the infected person's cells. Minoxidil is an interesting chemical and is often used in the treatment of hair loss and encourages hair growth in areas exposed to it. If it were left to permeate the whole body, we might find that a form of pseudo-hypertrichosis sets in. Hypertrichosis itself is a syndrome where an affected individual experiences rampant hair growth all over their body, in much the same way as we see in the Wolfman films. This, combined with minoxidil's tendency to cause swelling of hands, feet, and lips, sees us creating something very similar to a real-life werewolf. Of course, we needn't invoke minoxidil, and instead, we could simply find the virus-inducing hypertrichosis on its own. Either way, in the second version, we see the afflicted person is more of a werewolf in mind rather than body, with only a few physical characteristics to mark their infected status. Nevertheless, this latter version appears to be far more plausible than what we find in modern pop culture. And last, we're left with two very distinct but very different images of the werewolf, both contracted by viral infection, with one showing a slow but inexorable mutation of an individual into a wolf-like creature, and the other where an individual becomes a werewolf in their mind rather than in their body, with only a few side effects to show that they've contracted something sinister. Satisfactorily reified, we see how a werewolf-like being can come into existence. Though not bearing all the hallmarks of the famous myth, we can see that this is perhaps more plausible than was originally expected. Though we must never forget that the werewolf myth, much like the creature itself, is subject to wild and sudden transformations. Who knows what shape it might take in the future, or how increasingly plausible it may become.